SEP Fanfic Readings presents Accidental Proposal by CJRed. Chapter 27. Renegades. Draco watched his exhausted fiancée walk away towards the library to study, and turned as her brother yanked on his arm. "You said he wants to meet just the two of you this weekend." Draco gave a short nod and shot him a warning glance with a raised eyebrow, glancing around the crowded hallway. Pansy let out a loud sigh and pulled them into an empty classroom, warding the door, and raised her own eyebrow at him, and he had to grin at her. "Thank you, my dear," he said with a sarcastic bow, glaring at Theo. The man had the grace to flush, and then sank down on the table, wiping a hand down his face in exhaustion. "Right, keep it a total secret. But damn it, Draco, Hermione is making herself sick over this." Draco nodded, feeling his stomach flip. "I have noticed," he said in a hard tone. "I would not be begging my father of all people for assistance if the situation was not desperate." Pansy flinched, and Theo went pale, but nodded. "He says he has a resolution to the problem at hand." Draco sighed and sank down on a table, himself closing his eyes. "Those were his exact words. You read the letter as many times as I did, Theo." Pansy tutted, and Draco opened an eye to look at her, and she shrugged. "It makes no sense. He must have an ace up his sleeve we are not aware of. The perfect solution would be someone who is a master in both charms and potions, and we know of none. The other option is a master willing to take on 2 apprentices, and convincing her to go for a potions mastery with you." Draco nodded, frowning. "Which would be a miracle. No master takes on 2 apprentices at the same time. It just isn't done." Pansy narrowed her eyes, obviously considering this, and shrugged. "So a dual mastery we don't know about. But I went looking, and I can't think of anyone whom your father could have found. Charms and potions do go well together, but double masteries are hard to achieve." Theo sighed. "Well, Snape managed it, but he kicked the bucket." Draco flinched and almost hexed his best friend, who seemed to realize his mistake and said quickly, "Shite, sorry, mate." Pansy socked her fiancé. "You prat! That was his godfather. And while he was not exactly overly affectionate, he looked out for us the best he could, given the circumstances he found himself in. Show some respect." Theo rubbed his arm and gave a half grin before he said softly, "She's starting to sound more and more like Hermione." Pansy pulled out her wand. "Theodore!" Draco chuckled and stood up. "Why don't I leave you two to this little tiff and go make sure that our portkey has arrived? You are, of course, all set to cover for our absence, should anyone inquire after us." Pansy, who still had Theo at wand point, with a particularly vicious look in her eye, nodded curtly. "Don't insult us. Ginny and Daphne worked it out all last week. We have 3 backup plans in the works if we need them, and Blaze on call if those fail." Draco nodded and slipped out the door, smirking as Theo cursed as the first spell flew. He wasn't overly worried. Their fights usually ended with both parties unclothed. Hermione joked that she saw her brother in the buff more than she saw her fiancé anymore. Pansy, being the master negotiator that she was, had managed to have nothing about premarital relations put into her contract, leaving her elves' hands tied, and her and Theo free to explore each other all they wanted, all over the castle, as often as they wished. Draco shuddered and shook his head, trying to wipe his memory clean of the images of that very thing from his mind. Hermione wasn't the only one who had seen more of Theo naked lately. Walking into the common room, he nodded at Blaze and sank down onto one of the chairs, trying to shake off the headache that had started the moment they had set off the letter to his father, without informing Hermione of their plan. Blaze looked up and sighed. "Just tell her. It's done now, and she might as well know." Draco snorted and leaned his head back. "She's already exhausted. I don't wish to burden her with more than what she has on her plate. She is taking revision to a level I have never seen before." Ginny laughed as she walked in from the kitchen, handing him a cuppa and sitting down next to Blaze, who promptly set down his notes and pulled her into his lap, kissing her neck. "It's Hermione, Draco. This is what she does every end of term. We're just used to it. We slip sleeping drafts into her night cuppa sometimes on Friday and Saturday nights, and make her think she slept late," Ginny said, her eyes twinkling. Blaze raised an eyebrow and then laughed. "Gryffindors? Never!" Ginny shrugged. "Okay, so I did." Draco smirked and sipped his tea. "Do it then already." Ginny crossed her arms and cuddled into Blaze. "Done. But Blaze is right. You should tell her before you just portkey her into France to see your father. She doesn't do surprises well, Draco. Who doesn't do surprises well? They all looked up in shock to see Harry Potter walking into the room, flushing a bit when he saw where Ginny was sitting, but recovering well and walking in to take a seat. Potter, Draco said, setting down his cup of tea. Harry Potter nodded and then sighed. Look, I wanted to say I was sorry about how we reacted when we first found out about you and Hermione. Ginny has kept us up to date on everything, and it sounds like you two are pretty well matched, and she is happy. Well, outside of the normal trying to kill herself over exams. Draco snorted as Ginny hid her giggle, and Harry smirked at her. Blaise wrapped an arm around her and stared down the man, and Harry sighed. Zabini, just don't fuck with her and we are good. Draco watched Blaise Zabini consider the wizard in front of him, before he gave a slow nod and held out his hand. Harry Potter considered it a moment and then took it, shaking it and sitting back down. Right. I am here to hand over an unauthorized portkey, which I know nothing about, Harry said cheerfully. Draco looked over at Ginny in absolute shock. You told him? Ginny raised an eyebrow. Of course I did. Contrary to what you all think, Harry would die for her, and he keeps all her secrets, including this. If Lucius is helping, Harry will help us. If Lucius' intentions really are pure, he has nothing to worry about. If the dirty brat plays us foul, Harry will help Hermione hide the body, or provide a rock-solid alibi. Ginny huffed. And you really should make nice, Draco, because Harry was her brother before Thea was, and she loves the idiot. Harry flushed. Thanks, Ginny, especially for the idiot part there at the end. The wizards laughed as Ginny grinned and then winked. No problem, Harry. And thanks for the piece of glass bottle you know nothing about. What time is it set for? Harry rolled his eyes. All in the note for Hermione. Tell her beforehand, or someone will have to take Malfoy to St. Mungo's, because she curses first and asks questions later, when you surprise her with a portkey. Ginny looked over at Draco with raised brows and her hands held up. See, I told you. Awful idea to keep her in the dark about this until now. I mean, at first, sure, but trying to portkey her without her knowledge and ending up in front of the Malfoy home in France, you will be lucky to get out of that alive, love of her life or not. Harry turned on Draco with a malicious smile. Oh, you are not that stupid. That was your plan. Just portkey her to the meeting. She will avada you and I will get her off. Blaise cleared his throat. If I might make a suggestion, as much as it pains me to agree with the lions, they are probably right in this instance. Draco looked around at still smirking Harry Potter to see Blaise giving him a pained look. I would tell her, Drake, before the meeting. Make sure she does not have her wand when you do. Won't matter, Potter said, taking a seat, getting comfortable. Oi, what are you doing? Ginny asked with a huff. Getting comfortable for the show. I'm not leaving until he tells her, and I am sticking around so that she doesn't actually avada him because she does love the brat. Draco took exception to that, but paused as Hermione walked into the room. Harry, what on earth are you doing here? Before Draco could say a word, Big Mouth Potter spoke. Dropping off your illegal portkey for this Sunday night that I know nothing about. Ginny has it. Hermione looked at him for a moment blankly, and then turned to Ginny. Why do I need an illegal portkey? Ginny shrugged and gestured to Draco. Ask him, she said, snuggling into Blaise and throwing up a discreet shield charm. Draco noticed Harry doing the same and started to grow concerned. No one had taken her wand. Just as he was about to try to silently accio it, he saw Potter do it for him and breathed a sigh of relief, although he sent the man a wide-eyed look. Had he honestly just disarmed his best friend? Hermione jumped and then turned around and glared. Harry Potter, you double-headed sneak! Give me back my wand right now! Potter moved quicker than Draco had thought he could in a position behind Ginny, a large grin on his face. Not until you hear out the ferret, Harry taunted. And if after 5 minutes you still want to hex him, you can have it back. Draco glared at the brat. Hey! Hermione looked over at him and then sighed. I have no problem hearing out my fiancé and not hexing him, Harry Potter. A snort met this remark, and she crossed her arms as Ginny let down her shield and chuckled. The floor is all yours, ferret. Draco rolled his eyes. Must we be so juvenile? Hermione sighed, looking annoyed. Apparently, but her tone softened when she looked at him and his breath hitched. What is going on, Draco? Draco took a deep breath, and with a reassuring nod from Ginny, he launched into the story. To his shock, Hermione frowned, but didn't seem upset. She just looked confused. When she finally spoke, it was Draco's turn to be shocked. I sent him a letter about this a week ago myself. Your father might not be my favorite person. 3 snorts met his remark, and a small smile played on her face. But he does know rather a lot of people. I can't imagine who he has come up with, but hearing him out seems prudent, wouldn't you say? Draco nodded, unable to really say more, and Hermione sighed. Although the secrecy of it worried me. I was going to send an owl to Harry about it this morning. It would appear I don't need to. She stood up and held out her hand, smiling as her wand floated into her palm. But before Harry could blink, she had hexed him, causing him to start clucking like a chicken, and Ginny to fall off Blaze's lap, laughing hysterically. Draco held up his hands in surrender, and she glared at him before she turned to her best friend. That's for taking my wand, you prat! Ginny was still laughing uncontrollably, as Hermione grabbed her things and swept past them to the girls' dorms. Although, once Ginny realized Hermione had left, she jumped up and raced after her. I'm sleeping alone, aren't I? Draco asked, looking after her. Blaze chuckled as Harry continued to cluck as he seemed to fumble with the counter curse himself. I would guess so, but on the plus side she hexed Potter and not you. Draco shivered, and then shook his head, standing up. Come on, let's figure out this counter curse. As humorous as this is, we can't send him back clucking. Too suspicious. Hermione took Draco's hand and sighed, looking around the immaculate front gardens of the French estate. I am still not entirely comfortable with how secretive he is being, Hermione said with another sigh. Your father's secrets usually mean someone could end up in Azkaban. Draco chortled and pulled her into him. We can just leave. Hermione shook her head. No, I want to hear him out, and it's rude to say you are arriving and then not do so. Your mother is probably looking forward to seeing you. Draco nodded and moved forward, still holding her hand. I just have to wonder how my father neutralized the Mediwitch that reports back to Kingsley. Hermione sighed. I helped with that. Just a good sleeping draught that lasts a few days. I sent it to him in disguise as perfume for your mother. Draco shook his head as he knocked on the door. You're amazing. You do know that. Hermione smirked. You just think so when I show my devious side. Bloody turn-on, too, Draco said, pulling her back against him. Hermione giggled, but stopped as the door swung open, revealing a house elf who bowed at them. The master is waiting, the elf said briskly. Hermione gave Draco a surprised look. They were early, after all, and allowed him to lead her after the small elf. Draco was shaking inside, and had one hand on his wand, and the other on the woman he loved. He just couldn't shake the feeling that his father had something up his sleeve. Entering the study, he quickly nodded at his father, allowing Hermione to take care of the small chat, as he looked around for any sign of a trap. There is no one waiting to jump out and attack you, Lucius said, frowning at his son. Hermione smirked. Well, you can't blame us for being careful, Lord Malfoy. You and surprises usually end in a duel for me. She watched her future father-in-law shake his head, still obviously annoyed, and gestured them to take a seat. I assure you, I mean you no ill will. I was rather upset when I got Draco's letter followed by one from you, Miss Knott. I immediately set about calling in a favor in order to rectify this situation. Hermione resisted rolling her eyes at him for calling her only by her pureblood name. At school, she was still Miss Granger. Father, please excuse me for being rude, but how can you help? We have written to every master on the continent, and only found one accepting an apprentice this year. Lucius inclined his head and addressed them both. And so you would separate? Hermione flinched as Draco stiffened. That is what we are trying to avoid, Father. The man nodded, looking over them shrewdly, and then said, Miss Knott, you are very set on charms, then? Hermione nodded slowly, feeling as if she were on trial. I think the 2 masteries between us will complement one another. Lucius nodded, looking more relaxed. I quite agree with you. Charms and potions, when applied together, are a significant advantage of knowledge to have. Hermione let out a small breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding on to, and looked at Draco, who was watching his father through slightly narrowed eyes. So you have found 2 masters willing to take us both on located near one another? Lucius shrugged. Not exactly. Hermione felt Draco stiffen. Then why are we here, Father? Lucius smiled and inclined his head. That is not really my story to tell." Hermione frowned in confusion. They could hear footsteps approaching, and figured Narcissa was on the way. Draco was mumbling under his breath, and was about to stand up to greet his mother, when Lucius drawled, "I would stay seated, son." Hermione glanced back at Lucius, having been focused entirely on her irate fiancé. "Whatever for?" "So neither of you harm yourself fainting at what is about to be revealed to you, of course." Hermione held tighter to Draco's hand, and was just about to pull her wand when a voice she had never expected to hear said sarcastically, "No need for silly wand-waving, Miss Granger. He is under an unbreakable vow to tell you no more than he already has." And just like that, Hermione felt the world tip as Draco went stiff as a board next to her.